What's up, world? This is Kevin Siskar, and you are listening to Ambition Today, the podcast where we talk with investors and entrepreneurs about how they did it, where they are today, and what's coming next. With us today, we have James Murray. He is the co founder and partner at Excite Ventures. Starting his career with a law degree, James is now the co founder of Excite, where they lead an early stage venture capital investing firm that focuses on investing in the latest biotech and life science technologies. This is Ambition Today. And it plays like some corny intro music. Al's going to help us get some new music. And we're in it. James, welcome to the show.
What's up, Kevin? Great to be here.
Excited to have you for the comeback episode. It's been a little bit. I've had children, started a company. How are you doing today?
I haven't done those things, but did start two more companies. So we'll be gentle here and let you work the cobwebs out.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So let's go back to the beginning, like we tend to do at the start of these. Give us a little, a bit of the origin story of James Murray, and what were you doing before Excite Ventures?
Before Excite Ventures, I was at an asset management firm, hedge fund, private equity vehicle that I'd actually started at during law school. So happy to go into that more if you
Yeah,
want.
let's dive into it. Let's unpack it. I think the goal is we always want to show people what is the recipe, right? So for anyone who's young and listening, what should they be thinking about as they go down their pathway, their journey, and what could they maybe learn from the road you walked?
Yeah, I hope there's something there. If anything, my top level takeaway is just be open to different opportunities because you never know where you're going to wind up. Like for me, I went to law school thinking I'd go into international corporate arbitration, which is very niche, and wound up running an ophthalmology focused venture firm. You don't really know what's in between. You just kind of sign up to do different things that might interest you or be available to you. So in my case, I was in my second year of law school. It became clear to me that the field that I wanted to get into was probably not very welcoming of me. I was going up the competition with people that are multilingual. I've worked many years at World Bank or investment banks, which wasn't me, right? So I started doing what we do and reaching out to my network and saying, this whole law school thing, I don't know if I want to pursue that anymore. What kind of opportunities are open to me? And I actually linked up with a guy through mutual Buffalo connections here in New York. We met up and he introduced me to what would become my employer. And they were essentially a startup. The product happened to be a hedge fund, a financial product, but it was very startup in nature. It was a ragtag group of people. To some extent, this guy's drinking buddies, but they have struck gold and they were trying to turn some managed accounts into a professional organization. And they went, oh, law school guy. Yeah, you can help us try to figure this out. And so I started with them that summer, schlepping my IBM ThinkPad into the office and working on a corner of a radiator every day outside of Grand Central. And that thing took off. We went from 25 million under management in June of that year, and me not knowing what a hedge fund was and never wanting to get into finance, into 900 million under management over the next few years.
Wow. So law school is out the window at this point.
No, law school was very much on the wind, still in play. So what happened was I worked that summer. My friends are all at the big law firms in the city, and they're getting taken out to, Yankee Stadium and nice dinners, working the 9 to 5. That's how they trick you into big law firm life, right? And I'm here working for like minimum wage in Manhattan and then going to bartend at night. But that firm blew up to some extent in a good way. And they kept me on as an intern through the fall. And then I was working late one night, and the founder of that firm came in to the office to grab something he had forgotten. And he said, oh, I've been meaning to talk to you. Do you want to be the trader? And that was it. And I said,
yeah, it's funny. It's like just staying late at the office is such an easy life hack.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on I had class that day and I came in later to do something, and he just strolled in and had a guy who's been meaning to talk to you. Do you want to be a trader? I went. You realize I have no finance background, degree. Uh, I don't really know what to do. He goes, oh no, I've seen you work for a few months. You figure it out, um, and you're a hard worker. And that was it.
Yeah,
That was really it. So yeah, to the extent you're talking about advice for people, like I just kept showing up.
you kept showing up, but it also sounds like you were curious. You got presented with opportunities, and you said yes. Um, you sort of chased down. When other people could have just been like, I can't do that right now. I'm in school and I'm uh, doing this other thing, and you did both.
I did both, yeah. And part of the deal when they had asked me to join full time starting that January of my third year of law school was that I finished school. I mean, I'd already been, 2.5 years down. I didn't want to throw it out the window at the end of it. And they'd let me take the bar. So they agreed to those things. And I started as junior trader January 1st of 2007.
Nice. All right. So what happens next? Let's bring it to Excite. Where do you go from here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's fast forwarding many years, but ultimately, I got the chance in that role and then through a successive series of roles in that company to work with some of our earlier stage companies that they had invested in. And working with them, and then the experience of helping to build that firm from, again, just cobbled together managed accounts and people to professionalized organization spanning multiple continents, raising, hundreds of millions of dollars and having a front row seat to that. I went, right, take a step back. What do I want to do now? I want to go into venture. And by that point, that firm was winding down, though we had several years to do that. And they said, if you stick around and you bring us an idea, we'll back you, and we like it, we'll back you, and we can incubate the idea here. So, to me, with 3 years of law school already under my belt, that sounded a lot better than going to get an MBA and trying to work my way into venture or trying to find a startup and
What
then do that.
what attracted you to venture at the time?
Yeah. I think I've always been entrepreneurial, but I grew up in a very blue collar home, right? With my mother who was very risk averse.
Yeah.
Right. So when I was saying, oh, I want to start a business, I want to do this. But at the same time, I had said I wanted to be a lawyer from a young age. It was kind of always like, how about law school? And then figure the rest out. How about law school? But, I was a news carrier from 11 years on. I was, just snowed here in New York and like, thinking about shoveling the neighbors' driveways and cutting lawns, all of those, kind of markers of entrepreneurship early on. But I kind of always shunted that as risky and stayed away from it. So watching those guys build that firm essentially from nothing and then working with some of our earlier stage private companies and have the ability to roll up my sleeves and work with them, I was like, this is it, right? I didn't know what venture was growing up. I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is what I thought the law would be, which is, continually applying your learnings and your practice to new opportunities and learning about the cutting edge nature of business and innovation.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely attractive, and I could see, and then putting that up against because you were seeing a lot more of other sides of the financial markets, right? Hedge funds, private equity, like investment banking. Like, can you, for the audience listening that maybe doesn't know, just lay out that landscape and how venture is different, and maybe why that is the direction you went in?
I'll try to do so without being too disparaging to those other areas. Ultimately, it's a personal decision, right? And like it was what was appealing to me. And I was a trader for a number of years. You're building out your spreadsheets, you're pointing and clicking on Bloomberg, and you're trying to figure out where to price risk essentially. But to me, that was much too formulaic and interpersonal and not very personal. And what I really liked was working with the people and helping them in a very hands-on, practical way and seeing the results of, those efforts come to fruition. Whereas, it's nice to see a P&L hit in a trade and have that trade be successful. But to me, it was just far too removed. So, and also at that time, we're talking 2007, 2008, 2009, financial wake of the financial crisis.
Right.
Um, I was trying to get to something that was more kind of aligned with my skill set and my education and my personality. And at the same time, trading itself was kind of going to something that was more quantitative and math driven,
Right.
less relationship driven and hands on.
And
And then,
venture capital is kind of heating up as an industry at this time with the rise of, yeah.
yeah, that's an important context, right? Software eats the world. New York is becoming a bigger tech hub. Cornell Tech is opening. And so I looked at that and said, listen, we have this infrastructure at this firm. It would be great to build a tech focused firm here that capitalizes on the industries that are in New York and applies, technology and software to them.
Nice. So how? Okay, so they say, hey, let's take a shot. Um, how does Excite Ventures come into existence?
Yeah, so those people that we were talking to with kind of the tech expertise didn't want a second cup of coffee, let alone to be business partners for 10 or 20 years, right? So in that kind of context, the founders of the firm I was working for had vision issues. And then weeks within each other, these are lifelong friends. And I think this kind of speaks to the serendipity of life sometimes. Lifelong friends, they would each bring me an introduction that led to the founding of Excite. So one met a doctor here in New York, a retina surgeon. He was seeing him as a patient. They hit it off. He talked about how innovative ophthalmology is and all of the deal flow he sees just by nature of being a leading retina surgeon in New York. But he had no way to analyze whether or not it was a good investment, cap table, terms, et cetera. And I was like, that part's easy and boring to me. It's the science and the clinical side that's interesting and difficult. He said, I got that, right? So the reasons that I didn't want to go into life science or watching the practice that we'd had at that firm, kind of he was solving for with his hands-on expertise and 30 years of clinical practice. So that was compelling. I still didn't think it would work, but I was at least intrigued enough to take a meeting. And then the other founder of the firm I was working at, he was participating in a, a philanthropy that solved for inherited retinal diseases. And they were funding all this great research, but it wasn't making its way through the translational phase, right? So he said, maybe there's something we can do here on the venture side to help expedite that translational stage of innovation, right? So taking things from the university into clinical trials.
So again, I think let's lay the framework here for the audience or anyone listening, right? So um, we sort of talked about how venture capital is different from other tools like private equity and investment banking, which maybe tend to acquire or sometimes assist deals, right? Um, how is life sciences different than typical software investing? And I think that's important context because you've done a very good job bridging those gaps for a type of company, a life sciences company that maybe doesn't have that expertise or that kind of guidance.
Yeah, I mean, when I thought about going into this, I talked to a friend of a friend, sort of thing, an experienced biotech executive, and he said, first things first. Like, if you get into this, go for it. It sounds like a good and interesting opportunity, but understand this: biology is really effing hard. And those words come back to me almost every day, right? Because biology is incredibly challenging. You're dealing with idiosyncratic patients, and they're, billions and billions, trillions of cells, and they're all different, right? So, one, biology is incredibly challenging, and you can't move fast and break things like you can in software and technology. Um, and the other side of it is consequently it's highly regulated industry, right? So you need to go through stage clinical trials to get to a point where the technology is de-risked and can actually safely get into patients. So you're dealing with those two factors that compound the technical difficulty, and consequently the development timelines are very long.
Nice. So where is X Adventures today?
Yeah, so we bootstrapped this. I mentioned that we'd incubated at another firm, but they kind of had some liquidity issues while we were spinning this up. And so me and my two partners, Michael and Frost, two retina surgeons, kind of looked at each other and said, right now we're convinced that there's an opportunity here. What do we do? And we just bootstrapped it, and so we made our first investment, $100,000 into a company that we were actually talking to lead the Series B. They fortunately let us in still with our money,
Yeah.
to get a track record going. And that was a company called RetroSense. Optogenetics, talk about leading edge, cutting edge science. They were taking genes from algae and engineering them to put into the human retina to give a layer of the retina that doesn't have light sensitivity for blind patients, right? So just incredibly fascinating. And that company was acquired 11 months later by Allergan. So, one for one right out of the gate. This is
Good.
easy.
You should
Let's
stop there.
let's go. Go raise $100 million, and
Yeah.
it's harder than that, right? It's easy, as LPs understand. It's easy to get lucky once. So they said, go do it again, but that success will give you a small allocation. So what we've done over the series of the last, over the course of the last 10 years is to raise a series of funds and SPVs as we developed our track record, right? Again, we're getting involved at the earliest stage of life science innovation, whether it's med tech or biotech, and taking it through. And these things take many years, and not to mention,
Yeah, maybe you could talk about some of the, because you've shared with me privately, like maybe you could talk about some of the portfolio companies, what they do, and maybe help people get a sense of the types of companies you guys invest in.
yeah. So I already mentioned RetroSense, and that was developed for patients that had an inherited retinal disease, where because of their genetics, their retina will deteriorate over time to a point at which they're visually impaired or blind. Um, some of the other things we've invested in, Horizon Surgical Systems. So all those years ago, when I was a skeptic of whether or not there was a fundable strategy for an ophthalmology dedicated early stage fund, I went, right, guys, let's whiteboard where's the future of ophthalmology? What's the future of healthcare and then ophthalmology? And one of my partners said, surgical robotics. We're going to need that to do the precision medicine that are currently in development. So a lot of these gene therapies have to get injected subretinally. And at the time, we thought that would be much more difficult than it turns out to be. Nonetheless, we recognize, or Michael recognized, that surgical robotics was the future. And no sooner had he said that than for us goes, oh, I teach with this guy, JP. He's a retina surgeon and on faculty at UCLA, and he's developing this there. So we started a relationship there with JP when he was initially developing it for retina surgery, worked with him while he was still developing it at the university, him and Jacob Rosen. JP had the clinical medical side, and Jacob is an engineering robotics guy, expert. And so we just started having that conversation over many years. And then when they finally spun out, we were the first check in. And, now going back all those years, and now this past October, November, they did their first in human. So that's moving forward. So it's been incredible to see.
What is that for lay people like me? What inhuman means, what, and why is it?
Yeah. So, we experiment in biotech and medtech on animals, right? So the way that this technology was developed was first on a series of animal eyes, including pig cadaver eyes, right? And then you work your way up to live animals, and you're just giving them cataract surgery. And then you progress that into humans. So when you're satisfied that whether it's a medicine or a medical device, you're satisfied that it's safe enough, you then progress that into human trials where you're initially doing very small sample sizes. So this was a trial of 10 patients. So they did the surgery on 10 patients. So first in human, FIH is a critical milestone for any biotech or med tech development.
Nice. And what did Horizon do specifically to the eye to improve it?
They do cataract surgery. So cataract surgery will, if we're all lucky enough to live long enough, we'll all get cataracts, almost universally. So consequently, it's the most common surgery performed in the world. Historically, I think the first cataract surgery goes back to the Egyptians. So your lens crystallizes. The proteins in it stop folding properly. They crystallize, and your lens then becomes opacified. So that's why it's cloudy, right? So Modern medicine, you just go in there, pop it out, and pop a new one in there, a new lens, and you're pretty much good to go. You need reading glasses, or you might have some challenges. But there are limitations to surgical skill, distribution of good surgeons, and a shortage of surgeons coming. So if you think about where AI meets the physical world, this is a perfect application for that, which is in surgical robotics.
Well, what I love about that is, the I always love when people have operators embedded, people that deeply understand the technologies, the workflows, and that helps unlock where the investments go, right? And I think that sounds like you guys have a great pairing there with. That's a great case study of Michael and Frost seeing that, being able to apply it to the fund and bring that forward. That's great.
Yeah, I think it's critical for us, and I think it's an important part of the model, right? Because so often generalist investors rely on experts, outsourced experts, right? That they pick up the phone and call, but there's no way for those experts, to really know what the full suite of the competitive environment could be, right? So, for another company we invested in, which is sustained release technology, Ravana Therapeutics. So they're developing a polymer based system, a light based polymer system to deliver therapeutics in your eye. So, if we've talked about this, right, but 15, 20 years ago, if you developed wet macular degeneration, you'd be blind, right? It was,
Macular degeneration is when you go blind, but from like the middle out, right?
yes, your macula is in the middle. Yeah. And there are two forms of it. There's the dry kind and the wet kind, right? And the dry is characterized by lesions on your retina that then progress over time. And as they infringe on the macula, that's when you start to lose vision, right? And it's very simplified way. The
Yep.
wet kind is very comparable, but that's where your eye starts to grow new blood vessels, and those blood vessels then leak, right? And so that's why it's called wet. So those leaky blood vessels, once they hemorrhage and get into your retina, you will go blind, right? And so that was a case where technology jumped in, and there was an anti-VEGF, bore you on it, but that is the class of therapeutics, which are now a $12 billion a year industry, growing to 16 in the next few years. And they're commonly administered, where you get a shot in your eye. So now if you present to your doctor with that, and you'll go, okay, and he'll hit you with a shot in the eye, put very simplistically, right? Which sounds terrible and painful, but you're saving your vision, right? So yeah,
Yeah, you're not
yeah,
blind in your 70s and 80s. It's amazing.
yeah. But as you can imagine, we're all consumers, right? And we want to improve things. So the real goal there would be to not have to give these injections every month or 2 months or so, but to have a solution where you could deliver that for a long period of time. The reason I bring this up is all those years ago when I talked to Michael and Frost, I said, "What are the areas?" And they said, "We're doing all these injections. It's unsustainable. And if there's a solution now for dry AMD that we have to inject the eye, it's going to completely swamp us." And so, what is the solution that they were looking for? Sustained release technology. And we diligenced dozens of companies and technologies over many years before arriving on this one. But it's you might know this. What's the firm that refers to the prepared mind? The big venture firm. But that's like having a prepared mind of what you're going out and looking for, and the requirements that it would need to be clinically relevant. Whereas if I, as a layperson, were just backing into that, I'd have to go do a bunch of research. I'd have to talk to a bunch of clinicians. I'd have to rely on them and trust them to be giving me the right feedback, right? And
Yeah,
not,
being truthful, being honest. Yeah,
oh,
not
and
just being
not
friends with the
biased.
founder. And yeah, yeah, it's great.
So yeah, so I
Well,
think having them is a key part to our value proposition, right? Because they're in the front lines every day.
it's a huge advantage for sure. All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our partner, and we will be right back with James Murray of Excite Ventures. All right. Yeah, do a cough. Do what you got to
Clear the throat. All right.
do. Ready? I'm doing an ad read quick, so you can take it. You can take a quick break. Are you still running? Are you still running your deals off spreadsheets, tabs, old school CRMs, or a messy inbox? Finta is your capital co-pilot. Your deal workspace with an AI agent named Aurora built right into the core. Connect your inbox, drop in your deck, and Aurora builds your pipeline, drafts your emails, and keeps your relationships moving forward. So stop chasing, less chasing, more closes. Get started at trustfinta.com, where deals run themselves. First time doing it, guys. We'll see how it goes. I can edit that in post. I think with AI now, I can just change my words. So, uh,
I did that with our disclosure for with this software. It's a little wonky, but it works.
all right. All right, let's keep it going. Welcome back again. We are here with James Murray from Excite Ventures. All right, James, I want to switch this up to a new segment that we're going to kind of do here. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the news and the markets. I'm going to pull a few stories, and then if you're cool giving, we can chat about it a little bit. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. So this week, NVIDIA and Eli Lilly announced a plan to co-invest $1 billion over the next 5 years into AI-driven drug discovery. They want to use advanced AI models to speed up how new drugs are discovered and developed, cutting years off the research timeline. And it's funny because you ever see the Star Wars meme with like Anakin and Padme?
Yeah. Yeah.
There was someone made it last week where it's like we're using AI to cure cancer, right? And it's like no, we're like making like funny images and stuff on the internet. It's like we're curing cancer, right? So as someone who's in the industry, I want to get your take on like how is AI coming into drug discovery? There's AlphaFold that tries to map protein folding, and what are you seeing and how are you thinking about it?
I mean, it's incredibly important and a very welcome application of AI, right? To that meme's point. Um, One of the challenging things for me and frustrating things for me is we had two of our founders, now technically founders emeritus of Excite, had retinitis pigmentosa, which is an inherited retinal disease that has eventually caused them to lose most of their vision. So to see this with your friends happen over time, while all of these therapeutics are in development, it's been incredibly frustrating to watch the slow progress of this science, right? So if you're sitting here telling, and for many of the reasons I just discussed, right, you have to first test it in animals and optimize the drug. And many of the ways we do it are still very analog. They have high throughput assays and other technologies which expedite drug discovery processes. But still, by the time you're selecting it, you're relying on certain animal models and calculations, and you just won't know until the drug gets into a human, and at which point you could have adverse events like inflammation, which would completely kill the development of that program. And what does that mean? It means that many years and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars are now just gone, and you have to go back and either reboot that company and pick another lead, or it's over, right? And so if you think about the sunk cost, if you can just make that much more efficient and cut that time down, you'll significantly help not just the pace of innovation, but the efficiency of innovation. And so I think the first drug is about to enter human trials that was discovered not too long ago using an AI solution.
Oh wow, that's amazing. I've been following AlphaFold and some of those things, which are trying to identify all the proteins that are possible in the human body. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. I think what's going to happen is, and I want to talk a little bit about this as well, as as there's I have some VC friends who are like, we're done with software. Software's going to go to zero. It's too easy to vibe code. Now, there's still other moats in software, like your distribution, how you bring how you bring it to market, maybe data, right? But in a world where things that are harder are kind of more investable by VCs, things that have hardware, things that are maybe life science based. How are you thinking about sort of that transition in the market?
I mean, we're here for it, right? Because we've been kind of slugging away in healthcare, life sciences, biotech for 10 years now.
And
While
you've been kind of taking a venture capital approach to that angle, which no one else in industry is kind of doing, which is unique.
Yeah, it's hard. So part of the reason that a few things. One, part of the reason that it's inefficient is because the way people and funds and investors solve for risk in the space is just to throw a bunch of money at companies, right? And so here's 50 or $100 million, recognizing that you're going to fail a few times, but you're going to need that safety net of capital to get to where you need to go. Now, it sounds good in theory, and I was just on a call earlier today with some innovators and experienced operators that have been at pharma and startups that also recognize how it breeds capital and efficiency. So what do I mean by that? But yeah, you invest 50 or $100 million into a biotech startup. But what does that go to? Does it necessarily go to some of the very important preclinical development work? No, it goes to building out expensive lab space in Boston or San Francisco.
Whereas in software, 100K fundraise friends and family, maybe a million pre-seed, 3 million seed, 5 to 10 million Series A. It's more staggered. In this sector, it's all piled on top, dumped into a lab. Like,
Exactly. Here you're talking at least $15 million in most cases just to be able to get into human studies. And 15 is incredibly capital efficient, right?
wow.
So just to get to that stage where you could still fail and that the failure rate is high is going to take at least $15 million. Right. So, in looking at that problem, you solve for it by putting more capital to work. Now, we think there's another way to do it, which is through capital efficient development. There are so many outsourced organizations now that can handle this research. So you don't have to build out lab space until you're ready to scale up for human productions or if you're building a platform technology, right? Where the cost of outsourcing uh, overtakes what it would take to build your own lab space. So that's kind of, I think of it, again, taking a lot of our learnings from the tech ecosystem, the software ecosystem, of like having to build out a server farm in the 90s,
Yeah.
right? And you're
You,
$10-20 million, and then you could do it with AWS.
I might be getting it like, a bit over my skis in terms of the future, but like, do you think there's a world where as software becomes easier, you start to apply the same sort of problem solving that came to solving how computers work in the 2000s, 2010s towards these things um, that are more gene related, more CRISPR related, that we can start to, I don't want to say hack the human body, but it's in a way a different kind of code, and you know humanity's brains maybe get applied in this other direction as AI makes more and more of the computer stuff easier to
Without a
do.
doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, you mentioned AlphaFold, right? So much of that is just figuring out which proteins are going to respond to the human body and interact together to modify disease, right? And recently, there was actually a story that made national, if not global, headlines of a baby receiving a one-off gene therapy that they made and curing, to some extent, a condition which would have been life-threatening or ending, right?
Yeah,
So would have been fatal. And so I think what you're seeing now in the wake of that is FDA came out with guidelines, I think today, that said for ultra rare conditions, we're going to expedite gene therapies developed in this way because you can do it. It's just a question of whether or not it's an enterprise, right? So it may take $1 million to develop that one-off gene therapy, right? If you don't have to go through trials and everything else, but you can imagine with AI, the cost curve of developing one-off gene therapies will come down, right? And especially as you build out manufacturing capabilities, so many of these issues are questions of scale, right? And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah,
That's crazy. And I remember seeing the thing with the infant, and it makes so much sense. I mean, if someone, a baby's going to die by the age of 1, you should shoot your shot. And yeah, it'll be really interesting once we start to get deeper into that and unwrap that. But you guys are really well positioned. If all these other investors are trying to start to skate to where the puck is going, and you've already been, uh, you know, standing by the net, and the puck's already there, you're in a great spot. Um, Okay, I want to do one more segment here where we start to unpack the playbooks, the operation strategies for companies. And so, in talking to your portfolio companies, I know maybe it's a little different than software companies, so we could punt on any of these if you want. But I wanted to quickly look at, basically how I think about the four markets, the four departments of a company, which is like marketing creates leads, sales closes them, customer success operations activates or onboards, and product builds the product. Um, if you have any tools, tricks, things that you're seeing that are working really well in your portfolio companies, or even for you guys, that you want to share that could be helpful to any founders or other investors listening, um, let it rip.
I'm not being paid for this, but use Finta. Use
For fundraising.
fundraising, and
Yeah,
just getting your story right. I mean, Kevin helped us work our story out, and we've been so close to it for 10 years that it was very helpful to have just somebody outside of it take a fresh look at it. So, and I think whether or not you use Finta, that's up to you.
I,
But having that second set of eyes and helping the narrative and creating your story from early on is critical. Um,
I appreciate that. What else you got? I want to be fair to the audience here.
yeah. No, I'm thinking a lot about the narrative and storytelling a lot lately as we help some of our portfolio companies, and we kind of reflect on what's worked and what hasn't worked, and the companies that get funded, whether they're in our portfolio or not. It's often companies that tell a better story, particularly around biotech, where you don't have a go to market already. You kind of have some science and an idea and a team. So it's really telling that narrative of why you're the team to drive that science work and why that science will work.
I
Anyway.
think I think storytelling is becoming really important, especially there's so many decks now. I mean, as an investor, you see it. You're, getting obliterated with your inbox of cold email outreach, and it's impossible to sort of watch them, see everything. And so, yeah, storytelling is the way I think people need to stand out in the 2020s.
Yeah. And so some of the other, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's critical. And some of the other things that I think are important for early stage biotech and life science companies are developing a milestone map, right? And what we often see with scientific founders is taking their learnings from the lab or the culture of a lab, which is very slow and iterative and typically cost intensive, to being a nimble startup and figuring out what is the quickest way to get from A to B so that I can unlock this next stage of funding. Um, and so the founders and the companies that are able to do that well really scale much faster, get to the kind of escape velocity much faster than those applying a more scientific, rigorous
Mhm.
process where they're doing a lot of experimenting. So, in other words, if you're ready to spin out, talk to pharma professionals, build an advisory board of people that have done it before so they can identify the experiments necessary to get there, run those experiments in a very efficient manner, get your data package, because all we're doing in biotech and life science is data, right? Software or tech is users and revenue, right? And getting to that stage, we're just data packages. So, what is the data package that will either unlock that next regulatory hurdle or unlock that next stage of funding? Typically, those are related. So, if you get to a phase post phase one, you unlock another group of investors. Um, so,
Nice.
what's the data package and how
That's
you?
an interesting way to put it. With really the bundling that you're trying to do as a company to, what are you creating, and what's getting you to that next milestone to unlock the growth to keep going. Okay, I got two questions left for you, James. Uh, what are you most excited about?
That is such a massive question.
So the future of Excite, your future. What are you looking forward to?
So much. I'm looking forward to the next chapter of Excite and building and scaling the firm, right? The old phrase, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. We're on the other side of 10 years now, but I feel like I know that after, three exits, three BD deals, seeing what we've been capable of identifying and getting into early before others have recognized those opportunities, and now really building out that model and scaling that model. That's what I'm most excited about. You mentioned kind of skating to where the puck's going to be. Like, now that we've seen many others recognize the capital inefficiency of the model, of the biotech life science model and kind of gravitate to solving for that inherent risk through specialization and kind of applying that model that's predominated in tech early stage for years. I'm really excited about where this goes. And then you mentioned it, AI, and making these trials more efficient. One of our portfolio companies is called Novi, and they can essentially detect cell death in near real time, right? So it's called dark. They can detect the pace at which the cells in your eye are dying in a
Whoa.
much more efficient way than current methods. So the current method for these chronic diseases,
And then that I'm assuming stuff, technology, science, that extends into the rest of the body, or just the
potentially,
eye, or
no,
potentially.
potentially, yeah. So if you think about just without getting too far into the weeds on them, everyone should go check them out. But it's creating an efficiency in the space. Whereas if you have glaucoma or other degenerative eye diseases, it takes a very long time to monitor how quickly those are going to progress versus placebo, right? So if you're having placebo and you're getting a new drug, well, you need to wait in some cases years to see that separation. So here, if you could quantify cell death in a near real time basis, the opportunity to expedite those types of trials is incredibly exciting and only will make innovation of therapeutics much, much more efficient. So that's something I'm really excited about and thinking about kind of the picks and shovels of how we make the entire industry much more efficient than the current capital and time intensive standard.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the most exciting times in it feels like 15, 20 years. Like having watched mobile, go from the iPhone in '07 and the financial crisis up to like a peak in sort of 2021. We then had a few years of like feeling around in the dark, like maybe it's crypto, maybe it's Web3, what is this next wave? And then very clearly, with ChatGPT coming out in December 22, it's AI. And so it's exciting to be at the start of a new cycle again. And okay, let's jump to our last question. This is a question we ask everybody on the podcast. Feel free to take a moment if you need to before answering it. But what is the greatest piece of advice you've learned in your lifetime? Tell us the story of how you learned it.
That is a good one. And I was thinking about this. I did have a little prep. Appreciate that. The greatest, whatever. I'll just say it. I don't know about the greatest, so I'll qualify it there. But it's one that sticks with me, and I think about it every day. And it's
Okay.
if not you, who? Right. So the message there is like so often in our society we wait for permission and people to tell you like, oh, you have the credentials to now go do this, right? Well, sometimes just go effing do it. Just go do it, right? Because other people are likely waiting around too, and we see that in the sense of investors looking for lead investors and wanting others to do the work and have the CYA of that. Like, if you don't have the courage of your convictions, like, then you shouldn't be doing your job, right? You should jump in and have the ability to lead. Now, I understand all the caveats and disclaimers on that, but like, as a broad thing of like, if not you, who? So to the innovator out there thinking about starting a company, why not you? Go do it. Figure out ways to do it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think to, bring this conversation full circle, right? Like the people that run with things, the people that just do it, not to like, pull Nike in, but like though it stands out, right? And it ends up getting you ahead. And I think that's a great lesson for sort of anyone listening.
Well, and
Um,
knowledge, and just to take that thread a little bit further, like the more you know, sometimes can be a bad thing, right? So, like, if everything I knew now about starting Excite with the 13 years of experience in doing it, like, I don't know if I would have done it, right?
yeah,
But
you need the naivete to an extent.
you have to be a little crazy and have that naivete and just say, you know what, I'm just going to go do it.
I think
And
that's very true because sometimes you also see, and you probably see this because like PhD founders or myself overanalyze everything, right? And you need to sometimes just go and learn through doing, not trying to maybe concoct some perfect plan that executes flawlessly because nothing does that.
nothing does. We're actually starting a new business, an advisory business related to Excite, so that we can kind of professionalize some of the advice we provide to the ecosystem anyway. And in doing that, I'm reminded of the early days of Excite because like we don't know what we're doing, right? We know the product we want to put out there, but like none of us have built an advisory business before, so we're just figuring it out, and that's part of the fun of it, right? You're just going, I don't know, we'll figure it out, and it's been invigorating to kind of come back to that stage of development, and so yeah, I'd encourage anyone that has an idea and the capabilities to do it, just go do it.
Nice. All right. Well, James, thank you for coming on the podcast today. Where can people go learn more about Excite, more about you, anything you want to shout out? Where do you want to send the people?
exciteventures.com. Go check it out. It's our website. Portfolio companies are up there. We keep everyone updated on LinkedIn with goings on. And we'll have some news coming soon on a few different fronts. So stay tuned.
Very exciting. The show notes, which include everything from this episode, including links to what we talked about, will be up on the website. And we will see you all next time on Ambition Today.